The bar was already quiet by the time she stepped inside. It was the kind of biker bar most people only saw from the outside: low ceiling, dark wooden walls, and the constant glow of red and blue neon signs humming softly in the background. The smell of beer, oil, and old leather hung heavy in the air. A few motorcycles were still parked out front, their engines ticking as they cooled, as if reluctant to leave. Inside, a handful of men sat scattered around the room. They were big, broad-shouldered, covered in tattoos that told stories no one bothered to explain. Leather vests bore familiar patches, symbols that made most people cross the street rather than walk past them. Conversations were low and brief. Laughter was rare. This wasn't a place for small talk. Near the entrance, the woman hesitated. She looked out of place the moment she stepped forward. Her clothes were worn and slightly stained, her shoes thin at the soles. Her hands trembled as she clutched something tightly in her palm. She hadn't planned to come here, not really. But plans stop mattering when you've run out of options. A few heads turned. Eyes followed her as she crossed the room, each step heavier than the last. No one said a word. Even the bartender paused mid-wipe, watching her carefully. The silence pressed down on her chest. But she kept moving. At the center table sat a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He was older than the others. His gray hair slicked back, his arms thick with ink that stretched down to his wrists. His posture was calm, deliberate. A Hell's Angels patch rested openly on his vest. He looked up as she stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she lowered herself to her knees. The sound of her knees touching the wooden floor echoed louder than she expected. Her breath shook as she opened her hand. Inside was a single, crumpled $20 bill, creased, faded, and worn thin from being folded and unfolded too many times. "This is all I have," she said quietly. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "I don't know where else to go." Around them, the room remained frozen. A few bikers exchanged glances. One shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another leaned back, arms crossed, waiting to see how this would end. The man at the table stared at the bill, then at her face. There was no anger in his expression. No amusement either. Just a steady, unreadable calm. She held the money out with both hands. "I'm not asking for mercy," she added. "I'm asking for help." No one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, inside a bar where fear usually walked in first, something began that none of them could have predicted. For several seconds, nothing changed. The woman remained on her knees, her arms extended, the crumpled $20 bill resting in her open palms. Her hands trembled, but she did not pull them back. It wasn't pride holding her there anymore. Pride had disappeared long before she walked through that door. The man across from her didn't reach for the money. He studied it quietly, as if the bill itself carried a weight beyond its value. $20 wasn't enough to buy much in a place like this. Not respect, not influence, not protection. Everyone in the room knew that. A biker at the bar let out a low breath and shook his head. Another muttered under his breath, "That won't get you far." The woman heard them. She expected it. "I know it's not much," she said, her voice steadier now than before. "But it's honest, and it's everything I have left." She swallowed hard before continuing. "I didn't come here because I wanted to," she added. "I came because I had to." The man finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The leather on his vest creaked softly. His eyes met hers, not with threat, not with pity, but with something harder to read. "What are you really asking for?" he asked. The question hit her harder than she expected. She hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Time. One chance. Enough help to get through the next few days." She didn't mention the eviction notice folded inside her jacket pocket. She didn't mention the child asleep on a borrowed couch across town. Some details were too heavy to say out loud. The man glanced around the room. No one interrupted. No one laughed. The tension had shifted. This wasn't entertainment anymore. He picked up the $20 bill between two fingers. It looked even smaller in his hands. "You know who you're talking to?" he asked. She nodded. "I do." "And you still came?" "Yes." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he placed the bill on the table instead of pocketing it. "We don't take charity," he said calmly. And we don't make promises we can't keep." Her heart sank. She nodded once, preparing herself for the rejection she had expected from the start. "I understand," she said softly. The man stood up. Chairs shifted as several bikers straightened. Watching closely, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain himself. He simply stepped back from the table. "Go home," he said. The words felt final. The woman slowly rose to her feet. Her knees ached, but she didn't show it. She turned toward the door, fighting the urge to look back. As she reached for the handle, she heard his voice again. "Leave the 20. She paused, then placed the bill on the table, and walked out, unaware that the smallest offering she could give had just set something much larger in motion. The door closed behind her with a dull thud. For a moment, the sound of the rain outside crept back into the bar, filling the space she left behind. No one spoke. The $20 bill lay untouched on the center table, flattened by the weight of the man's gaze. Several bikers watched the door, as if expecting her to turn back. She didn't. The man remained standing, his expression unreadable. He didn't sit down. He didn't reach for his drink. He simply looked at the bill, then slowly scanned the room. "That woman walked in here with nothing," one of the men said finally, breaking the silence. "And you let her walk out with less." Another biker shifted in his seat. "She knew where she was. People come in here desperate all the time." "Not like that," someone else replied. "She wasn't playing a game." The man held up a hand. The room fell quiet again. He picked up the bill and folded it once, carefully, as if it mattered how it was handled. "Most people come here wanting something," he said. "Power, protection, shortcuts." He placed the bill back on the table. "She came offering something." A few men frowned, unsure what to make of that. "She offered trust," he continued, "and risked being humiliated for it." The bartender leaned against the counter. "You really think she had no other options?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes drifted to the far wall, where an old framed photograph hung crooked. It showed a younger version of him, standing beside a motorcycle long gone. The look on his face in the photo wasn't confidence. It was hunger, determination, the same look he'd seen in her eyes. "I've seen that look before," he said quietly. "You don't fake it." One of the younger bikers scoffed. "So what now? You chasing ghosts?" "No," the man replied. "I'm checking facts." He turned to another biker seated near the back. "Find out who she is, where she came from, and why $20 was all she had." The biker nodded without question. Quietly, the man added, "No scare tactics." The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows. The neon lights flickered briefly, casting long shadows across the floor. Someone laughed nervously. "And if she's lying?" The man finally sat down, his voice calm but firm. "Then she walks away with nothing," he said, "same as she came." He glanced at the door one last time. "But if she's telling the truth," he continued, "then we decide what kind of men we are." No one argued. The $20 bill remained on the table, no longer just money, but a test no one in the room could ignore. And somewhere across town, unaware of the quiet judgment unfolding behind closed doors, the woman believed her story had already ended. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time they stepped outside. Behind the bar, the parking lot was dimly lit, the glow from a single flickering light bouncing off chrome and wet asphalt. A few motorcycles stood in a loose line, their metal frames darkened by the rain. The sounds of the bar faded as the door closed behind them. The man stood beneath the overhang, lighting a cigarette. He didn't look at the others at first. He stared out into the lot, exhaling slowly, as if organizing his thoughts before giving them form. "She didn't ask for protection," he said. "She didn't ask for favors." One of the bikers nodded. "She asked for time." "Exactly." Another man leaned against his bike. "That usually means trouble." "Trouble already found her," the man replied calmly. "She just stopped running." They stood there for a moment, listening to the distant sound of traffic beyond the bar. No dramatic speeches followed. No vote was taken. This wasn't how decisions were made here. He turned to the biker he'd spoken to earlier inside. "You find anything yet?" "Not much," the biker answered. "Name's still unclear, but the address she gave the bartender checks out." Low-income block. Evictions all over that area. The man nodded once. No kids on record? He asked. Not officially. The man took one last drag and crushed the cigarette beneath his boot. Keep digging, he said. Tonight. A younger biker frowned. You planning to go after her? No, the man said. Not like that. He walked toward his motorcycle and rested a hand on the handlebar. We don't show up where we're not invited, he continued. We figure out what's real first. Another biker crossed his arms. And if it is real? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the bar, where the faint outline of the door could still be seen. The $20 bill was still inside, sitting where she'd left it. When someone puts their last 20 on the table, he said, they're not buying help, they're betting their future. Silence followed. Finally, he spoke again. We don't decide anything tonight, he said. We watch, we listen, and we wait. The others understood. Engines started one by one. Not in a rush, not as a show, just routine. One by one, they pulled out into the wet street, disappearing into the night. Across town, the woman sat alone in a dim room, convinced she had made the wrong choice. She didn't know that the decision she thought had ended her hope had only delayed it. And in the quiet between rain and dawn, something was already moving toward her, slowly, deliberately, and without announcement. The room was quiet in a way that made every thought louder. The woman sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her coat still on, her hands folded in her lap. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting uneven shadows across the peeling walls. It wasn't much of a place, just a rented room with second-hand furniture and a thin blanket pulled tight across the mattress. She hadn't turned on the television. She didn't want noise. She didn't want distraction. She wanted the night to pass. Her phone lay face up beside her, the screen dark, no missed calls, no messages. She stared at it anyway, as if looking long enough might change something. She replayed the moment in the bar again and again. The silence, the faces watching her, the way the man hadn't taken the money, the words he'd used, go home. At the time, she'd told herself it was better than being laughed at, better than being thrown out. Still, the walk back to the bus stop had felt longer than it should have. She pulled the eviction notice from her pocket and unfolded it slowly. The paper was creased from being read too many times. 3 days, that was all she had left. Across town, her child slept on a borrowed couch, unaware of how close everything was to falling apart. The woman closed her eyes and pressed her fingers to her forehead. What was I thinking? She wondered. Hell's Angels weren't known for mercy. Everyone knew that. She had known it too. And yet, when she'd stepped through that door, she'd felt something different, not safety, not hope, but the sense that running any farther wouldn't change the outcome. She stood and paced the room, stopping at the window. Outside, the streetlight buzzed softly, illuminating wet pavement and parked cars. Life continued, indifferent to her fear. Somewhere, people laughed. Somewhere, engines roared. None of it reached her. She sat back down and checked her phone again. Still nothing. The doubt settled in fully now. She questioned everything, her judgment, her desperation, the courage it had taken to kneel on that bar floor. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe she had misunderstood the look in the man's eyes. Maybe silence had been the answer all along. She lay back on the bed without removing her shoes. Sleep came in fragments. Each time she drifted off, she dreamed of engines starting and stopping, of doors opening and closing before she could reach them. When morning finally approached, she wasn't sure whether she wanted it to come. Because by then, she had already convinced herself of one thing. Nothing was going to happen. And whatever choice she made next, she would have to make it alone. Morning arrived without ceremony. The woman woke to the sound of distant traffic and the dull ache of a night spent half awake. The gray light slipping through the thin curtains told her it was early, too early to feel rested. Too late to pretend yesterday hadn't happened. She sat up slowly, listening. The room was still. No phone notifications, no messages, nothing had changed. She stood, stretched the stiffness from her back, and moved toward the small sink to splash water on her face. Her reflection looked tired, older than she remembered. The doubt from the night before returned almost instantly. Of course nothing happened, she thought. She reached for her phone again. More out of habit than hope. Still nothing. Then she heard it. A low, distant sound, barely noticeable at first. She froze, standing still in the center of the room. The sound came again, this time clearer, deeper, a rumble that didn't belong to the neighborhood's usual morning routine. Engines. Not one, several. Her heart began to race. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. The street was empty. For a moment, she felt foolish. She let the curtain fall back into place and shook her head. Lack of sleep did strange things to the mind. Then the sound returned, louder now. Closer. The rumble grew steadily, rolling through the narrow street like distant thunder. She stepped back from the window. Her breath shallow, unsure whether to feel fear or curiosity. And then came the knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. Just 3 firm taps on the door. Her stomach tightened. She stood there, staring at the door, every instinct telling her not to open it. People didn't knock on her door this early. Not with engines like that outside. The knock came again. "Ma'am," a voice called through the door. Calm, controlled, not raised. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Slowly, she opened the door. The sound hit her first. Motorcycles, rows of them, lined along the street. Their engines idling in unison. Chrome and black filled her vision. Helmets, leather vests, familiar patches. She stepped back instinctively. Standing at the door was the man from the bar. His expression was the same as the night before, steady, unreadable. Behind him, the street was packed with bikes. More than she could count at a glance. Neighbors peeked from windows. Someone across the street froze mid-step. The man spoke quietly. "Sorry to show up unannounced," he said, "but we needed to talk." Her mouth went dry. About the $20, she thought. About the mistake she knew she'd made. She nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. Behind him, engines shut off one by one. And just like that, the quiet street became the center of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. The street had never looked like this before. Motorcycles lined both sides of the narrow road, stretching farther than the woman could see from her doorway. Chrome reflected the early morning light. Engines idled low and steady, their sound vibrating through the pavement and into her chest. She stood frozen. There were far more bikes than she had imagined, dozens of them. Parked with careful precision, not chaos, not a show, just presence. The man stepped aside slightly, giving her space to see. "They came with me," he said simply. Across the street, a curtain shifted. A neighbor stood frozen on the sidewalk. Grocery bag hanging from one hand. Another neighbor peeked through a half-open door. Phone already raised but not recording, unsure whether this was something to document or something to avoid. The woman's first instinct was panic. "I didn't ask for this," she said quickly. "I swear, I didn't." He raised a hand gently, stopping her. "We know," he said. "That's why we're here." Behind him, several bikers removed their helmets. Some nodded at her. Others simply waited. No one crowded her doorway. No one spoke over him. One by one, engines shut off. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise had been. "Last night," the man continued, "you put $20 on a table where people usually put demands." She swallowed. "That wasn't money," he said. "That was your line in the sand." She didn't know what to say. "I didn't expect anything back," she finally admitted. "I just didn't want to disappear." The man looked at the bikes behind him, then back at her. "You didn't," he said. A biker near the end of the line stepped forward slightly. "We checked your story," he added, quietly. Her breath caught. "No records that help you," he continued. "No shortcuts, just bad timing and worse luck." The woman's eyes filled, but she held it together. "So what is this?" she asked. "Because I don't have anything else to give." The man shook his head. "We're not here to take," he said. "We're here to finish what you started." She glanced again at the street, at the bikes. The men, the attention her small, quiet life had never drawn before. "This isn't about fear," he continued. "It's about respect. You walked into a room knowing exactly who we were, and you didn't lie." A car slowed at the end of the block, then kept moving. The man took a step back. "May we come in?" he asked. She hesitated only a second. Then she nodded. As the first biker moved forward and the line behind him shifted, the woman realized something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't standing alone. They didn't sit down right away. The woman stood near the small table in her living room, unsure where to place herself. The space suddenly felt smaller with several bikers inside. Though none of them crowded her, they remained standing, helmets tucked under their arms, respectful and quiet. The man closed the door behind them. "We didn't come here because of sympathy," he said calmly. Her shoulders tightened. "I didn't expect sympathy," she replied. "I just needed a chance." He nodded. "Exactly." He gestured toward the table. "Mind if we talk?" She nodded and sat, her hands folded together. He took the chair across from her, resting his forearms on his knees the same way he had at the bar. "When you walked into that place," he said, "you didn't know what the answer would be." "No," she said. "I just knew I couldn't keep pretending I was fine." He leaned back slightly. "Most people who come to us already have a plan," he continued. "They want leverage, they want protection, or they want to scare someone." She shook her head. "I didn't want any of that." "That's why you mattered," he said. She looked up. $20 isn't payment," he continued. "It's proof." "Proof of what?" she asked. "That you were willing to lose," he said. "Not money, dignity, pride, whatever you had left." One of the bikers near the doorway spoke up. "You didn't threaten us. You didn't lie. You didn't pretend to be someone you're not." The woman exhaled slowly. "I didn't have the energy to lie anymore," she admitted. The man nodded. "We figured that out." He reached into his jacket and placed the folded $20 bill on the table between them. "This stayed with us all night," he said, "because it reminded us of something we don't like to talk about." She glanced at the bill, confused. "Every one of us," he continued, "has been on the wrong side of a closed door at some point. People see the patches and forget what came before." He paused. "You didn't see symbols," he said. "You saw people." The room remained silent. "That's why we came," he finished. "Not because you begged, but because you didn't expect us to be anything more than honest." Her eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look away. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. The man slid the $20 bill back toward her. "Now," he said, "we make sure that bill doesn't turn into the last line of your story." And for the first time since the knock at the door, the woman felt something shift, from fear to understanding. They didn't start with promises. Instead, they started with questions. The man asked about the eviction notice, how long she had, who the landlord was, whether there had been any extensions before. Another biker took notes quietly. Not on paper, but on his phone. There was no judgment in their voices. Only focus. "This isn't charity," the man said. "It's logistics." She nodded, still unsure how to respond. Within minutes, the room shifted from tense to purposeful. One biker stepped outside to make a call. Another asked if she had eaten. When she shook her head, someone placed a paper bag on the table, simple food. Nothing fancy. "Eat," he said. "Decisions go better when you're not running on empty." Across the room, a third biker examined the peeling wall near the window. "Water damage," he muttered. "Easy fix." She watched them in disbelief. No one handed her cash. No one made grand gestures. Instead, things began moving, slowly, deliberately. By midday, the street outside was quieter. Most of the bikes gone. A few remained. The man stayed. "We spoke to your landlord," he said later. "Didn't threaten him. Didn't scare him." Her heart jumped. "What did you do?" "We listened," he replied. "Turns out he listens too, when the facts are clear." He explained that the eviction would be paused. Not erased. Paused. Enough time for her to get back on her feet. Another biker returned with paperwork. Temporary work. Legitimate. Immediate pay. "You said you needed time," he reminded her. "This buys you some." She took the papers with shaking hands. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. The man shook his head. "You already did." He gestured toward the $20 bill, now folded neatly and tucked back into her hand. "That's not a debt," he said. "That's a reminder." As the afternoon wore on, repairs were made. A broken step fixed. A loose lock replaced. Small things that added up to something larger, stability. Before leaving, the man paused at the door. "We won't hover," he said, "and we won't follow you." She met his eyes. "Thank you." He nodded once. Outside, the last motorcycle started and rolled away. The street returned to normal. But the woman knew something had changed, not just around her, but within her. Because what they gave her wasn't money. It was momentum. Life didn't change overnight, but it moved forward. A few weeks later, the woman unlocked the door of her small place just after sunrise. The air was cool, the street quiet in the way it always was before the day began. The repairs made that morning weeks earlier were still holding. The lock turned smoothly. The step no longer creaked. Small things, but they mattered. She had work now, not glamorous, not permanent, but steady enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Her child was back home, sleeping in the next room, safe and unaware of how close everything had come to falling apart. The $20 bill sat folded inside a drawer. She hadn't spent it. Not because she couldn't, but because it had become something else. A reminder of the moment she chose honesty over fear. One afternoon, as she was locking up to head to work, she noticed 2 motorcycles parked down the block. Not 50. Just 2. The riders didn't approach right away. They waited. When she noticed them, one raised a hand in acknowledgement, not a warning. Not a display, just respect. Later that week, they stopped by again. They didn't stay long. A quick check-in, a few words exchange. No crowd, no attention drawn. "You holding up?" one of them asked. She nodded. "I am." "That's good," he said. "That's all that matters." They left without another word. Neighbors stopped whispering. Curiosity faded. Life returned to its rhythm. But the woman carried the lesson with her. She learned that reputation often hides truth. That people aren't always what symbols suggest. And that respect, once earned honestly, doesn't need to be loud to be real. Months later, when someone asked her why she never talked about that morning, she answered simply. Because it wasn't about being saved. She said, it was about being seen. She never went back to the bar. She didn't need to. Some doors are meant to be opened once and remembered. And somewhere in a city full of noise and assumptions, a small, quiet story continued to prove something most people forget. Respect is not given to the strongest voice in the room. It's earned by the courage to show up with nothing left, and still tell the truth.